Welcome to the A-Game Poker Podcast. My guest on today's podcast is Sylvain Loosli. Sylvain is a top tournament player with approximately $8 million in cashes. Sylvain shot to prominence with a fourth place World Series main event finish and followed it up by making the final two tables of the same event in the years that followed. And that's an exceptional achievement in the modern era of the World Series main event. But it's just one point in a career of consistent excellence, both in live and online poker. So let's just talk to Sylvain and tap into his experience and insights on what it is that got him and keeps him at the top. Well, hi, welcome, Sylvain. Great to see you. We now share the same city, having known each other before that, and thank you for coming in.
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me. Always a pleasure to exchange with you.
Well, great to see you. And I just wanted to start, in the introduction, I talked about your career achievements. But what I wanted to do was ask you to just reflect on your career and the points which have defined your career over and above the big wins or the big scores. What points do you look back on and say, these are the points where I took a decisive move in the right direction in terms of the way you developed your game and your mindset around poker?
Right. So I think we can probably go back to the very beginning of my professional career. So this was back in 2011. I started playing professionally full-time, finishing my studies. I was playing mainly cash games online. And I got to meet up a bunch of people. I was part of like a small community of back then already high-stakes, mid-stakes players. So yeah, just met them in Thailand, I think, the first time, like a bunch of them. And we were like just fully focused on the game. So I got to become very good and close friends with guys like Seb Sabik, Alex Luno, Rui Cao. Names you still hear about. Yeah. Some of them quit poker. But yeah, being part of this very ambitious community of like hard workers, guys who wanted to play the highest stakes, I think this was one of the most important parts, defining point in my early career. So I got to play a lot, exchange ID on like daily basis with also very, very smart players. And then also later on in my career, after my first main event score, I started playing super high stakes tournaments. I wanted to basically take some shots at higher stakes. And for that, I needed to selection, and having this kind of network was also really important. And also having some advice on like evaluating the EV of the games, of is it worth playing these tournaments or these games, was also very, very good, very important in my opinion.
It's really interesting that the thing you've gone to immediately is the power of the network. And this is something that comes up again and again. And you've listed some advantages which aren't even the ones which most people would think of in terms of the network. But there's the technical upgrades you can get. There's the fact that you, get that kind of input in terms of which tournaments you should be playing, maybe some backing. In terms of other habits, other things which have upgraded you, did you get anything in terms of mental game or routines or habits which, by being part of a network, you upgraded yourself in that way?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it was also about maybe ambition, because we were all driven to play the highest stakes possible. I mean, some of my friends were already playing much higher than me. They were playing like nosebleeds at the time. And I started playing a lot of heads up. At the time I was playing 5-10, then moved up to like 10-20. I was playing pretty much any opponent on the European sides. I was doing pretty well. And I started playing even higher, like 25-50 heads up. So I think this part of my career was very formative in a way, because you had to play like very long battles, like play like 3-tabling, 4-tabling, heads up against other good players. So in terms of like mental game, I think it was really good development. You also had to play very, very long sessions, sometimes like 8-10 hours in a row.
Yeah.
I think this was a defining point, yeah. In terms of routine, I think the healthy routines maybe came a little bit later.
Yes.
in my career when I got a bit older and wiser, and I wasn't like playing as much poker. Maybe I was still playing a lot of poker, but let's say I had more time to reflect on what I could do better on a daily basis to optimize my game and to find some edges just outside of a poker table, basically.
That's interesting. I mean, one question I'd like to ask you, and obviously on the face of it, you've made a lot of very good choices in terms of progressing your poker career. But if you could go back and advise your younger self at the outset of your career, give one piece of advice, what would that be? Something that you wish you'd known at the outset, which perhaps you've learned from experience?
Yes. So I think one advice would be to just stay hungry. Just keep putting the hard work and don't rest on your knowledge, because poker is has been evolving a lot with the advance of software tools, solvers. We learned so much about theory, so the game became much more competitive over the years. That's obvious. But yeah, I think one fallacy can be that when you're doing really well in poker, it's just kind of like, just keep playing and you don't necessarily like study as much as you should. But there are some guys out there who are like very hungry and like they're moving up the stakes and they might be working harder than you. And if you don't put enough efforts, at some point they're going to catch up and they're going to become better than you.
Yeah, for sure. And you talked about things that maybe you integrated later in your career as you got older and wiser. Tell me a little bit about what kind of things you did as you moved through your career to keep in the best possible state to compete in the games.
Yeah, I guess one of the first one that comes to mind is mental work, for sure. I actually started working on the mental game very seriously back in 2013, I think. Actually, right before my main event run.
Yeah.
This was when I was starting to play pretty high stakes online, 25-50, even taking some shots at 50-100. So the swings were pretty big.
Sure.
At that point, like swinging 20-30K a day was quite common. So even though you're already you have like few years behind you of like playing professionally, and it's becomes like a lot of money. So you need to be able to stay detached from the value of the money when you're playing poker, and also making sure that you're not being affected by the swings emotionally, and you're still playing your A game on a consistent basis.
So what have you, I mean, obviously you've highlighted one of the big challenges, which is coping with the swings. What could you perhaps share a few thoughts about what the biggest mental game challenges you've had to deal with and the kind of techniques that you've used to approach those?
Right, I think there are loads actually. It's hard to just like pinpoint a few in terms of like mental challenges you can face as a poker player. I think most people could relate to, for example, how to deal with downswings. Because at any point in your career, sometimes you have to face some it can be quite long, but it can be also sometimes just a few weeks, but it can be a few months long. Dealing with downswings can be quite tough, because this is basically when you're going to start questioning sometimes too much your game, your abilities, and if you're not playing your A game on a consistent basis, then it might actually stretch out the downswing.
So you've described downswings and the importance of dealing with those, and you made a decision at some point to move into MTTs, where the downswings can be even more brutal. Perhaps the individual games don't have as much money in them, but the length of a downswing can be quite significant. Tell me about how you've managed to deal with that, how you found it compared to dealing with downswings in cash games and variance in cash games. Right.
So I think maybe in my position, I was also lucky to have, first of all, like a much bigger bankroll than a lot of players. Thanks to having like won already like quite a lot of money playing cash, and then my main event score So I was much more comfortable to approach the swings of live poker. Because obviously you don't play so many tournaments. It's even if you put some volume compared to online, I mean, live poker is just ridiculous. The edges are higher for sure, but the variance can be ridiculous. But yeah, I got also the chance to become a brand ambassador. I was a team pro for Winamax for many years, which was great support to cover a bunch of travel expenses. It was a great way to also take shots at like bigger buy-ins. So yeah, I did, to be honest with that, my background and my bankroll, dealing with swings was for sure much easier.
For sure.
And I was also not to I was trying not to think too much about, short-term results, and had these clear goals of like reaching the high stakes as soon as possible in tournaments. Once I made the transition. So yeah, I think it was more like later on I had to deal with like, let's say, bigger downswings when I started playing really high stakes.
I see. So I just want to now focus on your World Series deep runs, because you are in the modern era a very unusual phenomena of having two properly deep runs. I mean, I know if we go back to the days of Helmuth, that kind of thing happened quite a bit, but the field sizes were completely different. I just want to really tap into what you learned from those deep runs, because I suppose you had the unusual experience of having one super deep run coming fourth and then finding yourself going super deep again. Just looking back on that first deep run, what, if any, big takeaways did you actually manage to extract from that experience first time round?
Yeah, I think first time around, it's actually funny. I think one of the biggest takeaways that I wasn't prepared to like perform at my peak for 7 days straight.
Yes.
And it's a real marathon, to be honest. It's a real marathon. So actually at the end of day 6, so we're already very deep. We're like 40, 35 people left, I'm not sure. I was a little bit tired, a bit pissed off by a few hands that didn't go my way. And I made like a very questionable, probably a pretty bad like semi-bluff. I ended up like being lucky getting there. But yeah, this was one of the takeaways. But the next day, it was day 7, so I don't know, let's say 28 people left. And then somehow, I knew I kind of like fucked up, made a big mistake, but I got lucky. So I knew I had to like seize the chance. And I was actually thriving under the pressure. I could see like a lot of people were really feeling the pressure because of the spotlight, the cameras, the ESPN, the amount of money. But I was really thriving, and things were going my way. And yeah, wasn't shying away from making moves, making bluffs, and it ended up going pretty well in the end.
Yeah. So then you came fourth that time, and then a few years later you find yourself on another deep run. What did you feel, if anything, the first experience had given you going into the really deep stages of that second run?
So yeah, second run was quite different. Like you mentioned the routines earlier. Like this time around, I was, you could say, well-seasoned pro. I had played the professional circuit for many years. So I had very good routines in terms of like how to manage my sleep, for instance, which was like so important, especially during the main event. Having some, like morning workout routines to arrive fresh, do some mental work as well, some quick meditation, visualization. So I was feeling really, really good in that way. Also, there's like a somewhat funny event that occurred just right before the main event itself. Like I actually witnessed someone died who was like in the Grand Canyon. Someone fell off a cliff. It was kind of like, I wasn't like right next to it, but I was pretty close and I got to witness that. It was quite a traumatic event in a way, because you really feel like you want to do something, but you're obviously helpless, and you just like contact the rangers, and yeah, it felt really bad. And then I got the chance to like do some work with Elliot Rowe the next morning to kind of like put these things in perspective. But also after that, I also felt a lot of gratitude. Just a lot of gratitude to be there, alive, healthy, to play the game I love. And I think that the whole experience, in a way, made me more grateful to go deep in the tournament. Have that second chance to showcase my skills and go very deep in a great tournament. So I believe there's always like this part of like positivity, and when you have like a great mindset, it does play into how you can perform and at the best of your ability.
And tell me a little bit about, once you go on that second run, I mean, maybe some people in the first run would have known who you were, but by the second run, I would have thought you were sitting at table after table and pretty well everybody would know who you were. What kind of dynamics occurred there? How did you deal with that?
It's a good question. I'm not sure if everybody would know me, but for sure, like a bunch of players knew me. So maybe some of them tried to avoid me. That's a possibility. But to be honest, it's such like a diverse field. You have lots of pros, but also lots of more like recreational players. I didn't think too much about that. This wasn't too much in my mind. Maybe until let's say the final stages, right? Day 6, day 7, then the field gets tougher. It's a lot more like professional. So then they know about you, or at least they read poker news, and then it's like, oh yeah, Sylvain Loosli is there again. So then the dynamics can change a little bit. But yeah, I think it's just about being in the present and adjusting your strategies to your opponents, and see who's scared. Is there anyone scared? Are you gonna deviate in your strategies because of that, or do they look like they're ready to battle? And then you have to
Absolutely. So now you are, as you say, a seasoned pro, and you've had the experience not just of those runs, but of going to Vegas year after year. I presume you've got a lot of the routines, the sleep, the way you prepare pre-session, post-session. But what is the next frontier for you? I mean, I know you're somebody who always is looking to improve. What is it you now look to improve when you go to a big live event, for example? What are the things you are still looking to get that extra little bit out of yourself?
Right, that's a good question. I think lately I've been working on optimizing let's say my warm-up routines before a big event. Make sure that my mindset is on point, that I have like let's say some big principles in mind about live poker, especially if you've been playing like a lot of online before, which often happens, especially before the World Series. There's like Scoop Online, so a bunch of like online series, and you're just facing somewhat different opponents, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So you have to readjust your strategies, and there are more recreational players, so you have to put yourself in their head, basically, and remember how they perceive the game, how they approach the game, and how you really need to take that into account if you want to make the right adjustments.
That's a real challenge, right? I mean, a lot of...
Actually, it is, yeah, it is.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of professionals have a problem of projecting their own thought processes onto players who think completely differently about the game.
I've done the mistake too in the past. It happened to me at times.
And how do you go about that? I mean, is there a particular methodology you use to overcome that problem?
Well, I think it's basically about taking notes and remembering that people approach the game differently. Maybe going over some hands that you played recently, even online. Some hands you played against recreational players, and you remember how sometimes they make bluffs that make no sense, or they show up with some holdings, with some hands that you wouldn't expect. So being prepared to deal with that, and you're gonna have this information, these components in your decision-making process, which is gonna be quite important.
So you've touched on some of the mental game challenges you've faced. I wonder if you can just share with us how mindset coaching has led you to change some specifics about the way you approach the mental game challenges and the way you prepare yourself to play.
Right. So yeah, it has helped in a lot of ways. But I can think about a few like specific instances of a few specific challenges. Like for example, dealing with like a lack of results, especially when you play live poker. It can happen. There's a lot of variance, and I know that personally, at some point, I was struggling to deal with like lack of like big result because I was used to it, and had to kind of like reframe change the time frame and don't think like, oh, 6 months without a big result in live poker. Mm-hmm. I mean, it has to happen at some point, right? It doesn't mean that I have to reconsider everything I do, but it can also be like a good opportunity to, make sure that I'm performing well, that I'm studying efficiently, maybe look even deeper in my game, see if there are some areas of game where I'm not performing as well as I should, right? Yeah. So more like taking these periods of as opportunities to, challenge yourself or work even deeper on your game, and not just be not just like wait for the be like waiting for the next big run to happen, like, oh wait, when is it coming? Yeah. Just work on it, and eventually the results come anyway.
This is the way you framed your response to downswings is something I've observed in the best players. They are able to at once recognize that they are still fundamentally plus EV propositions in the games. They don't lose sight of their qualities, which meant that when they were playing, when they were on the positive side of variance, they could recognize that and they could be confident. They never lost that completely during downswings, mm-hmm. even though the downswing was tough. But at the same time, see that downswing as a chance to improve, actually use it as a springboard to get even better. And that's something I've really observed in the very best players. And I think it's what drives people on who actually go on and succeed and sustain long careers, which is something I'm going to talk to you about in a minute. I want to talk to you because you've now been at the top for a long time. Tell me a little bit more about that. Tell me about what you think has sustained your longevity in poker, because, we've talked about the remarkable ability to reproduce results in the main event, but your career is much, much more than that, and you are still consistent. I know your results, and you're still producing online and live consistently. What do you think is marking you out as able to sustain that consistency? Because that is the pot at the end of the rainbow every poker player chases, right?
Right. Well, first off, I guess having a competitive personality is probably very important, but it's certainly not going to be enough to achieve consistency over a long time. So then I think I'm setting some goals. So goal setting, I think it's very important part of the process. So having some probably like hard goals, which are going to be hard to achieve, but they're going to be driving your career. It could be like becoming number one in the GPI rankings. That's going to be really hard. You can have like to put a lot of effort, a lot of volume to get there, or winning some EPT main event. You might never win one, actually. Even some of the best players never won one because these are tough fields, big fields, not so many opportunities every year. But I think it's very important to have this kind of like big drivers in your career. And then you can have, of course, like smaller goals in between, like winning smaller tournaments or moving up in stakes, which are going to help. But I think that's a very important part of the process. And then, of course, I think a lot of it is also very straightforward. You have to be studying a lot. So you have to find a process which works for you, I think, in terms of like learning and studying, so that you actually enjoy the process of, doing the solver work, the study. It's not like something you dislike. So I think different people have different ways of learning. So you have to find what works best for you. If you prefer working alone, working with a community of other players, I think that's probably, it's very necessary for everyone. But I think you have to mix both, like working, exchanging ideas and strategies with community, with other players, but also do some work on your own to make sure that you've integrated the concepts, the important concepts, important theoretical concepts of a game deeply, and then you can implement the strategies effectively when you're playing, where it's like a high pressure environment.
I really like the way in your answer you've gone from the macro to the micro, and I think again, when I encounter difficulties with players or players who are encountering difficulties and I try and help them, they maybe have one or the other. And your answer, I don't know whether it's coincidence, but you refer to high, hard goals. And it's a phrase that Stephen Kotler...
Yeah, I actually read this book recently, so that's probably why it came up naturally as well.
Well, I'm glad you raised it, because it's a really important concept. I mean, for those people who are watching the podcast, listening to the podcast, Stephen Kotler probably is the best writer today on the psychology of flow, and he starts his most recent book talking about the value of high, hard goals, and these real big shifts, these things that we want in our life. And I think some people have the idea of a vision, but they don't then translate it into the micro steps, and that's the next thing Stephen Kotler talks about. When he talks about flow, there is a struggle phase, and it's the small steps, and you talk about the solver work and so on. But I think the other thing that you've also touched on, and I'd like to expand a bit more, is, of course, some people then think, okay, fine, I've got to do 1 million solver solutions and become better at poker, but there's a lot more to it than that.
Actually, sometimes the funny part is that sometimes by doing less, you're actually more effective.
Exactly.
And sometimes there are like times where you just want to put a lot of study in, and it's good, but you have to find the right balance, because sometimes doing more is not more productive. Exactly.
And I mean, you've already referenced at an earlier point in your career the value of being part of a network. I know that you are part of a network of elite MTT players, and there's other people in there. I know there's a heads-up specialist, a real crushing heads-up specialist in there. Right. Tell me about the value of that in terms of how that's helping you at this stage of your evolution.
Yeah, I mean, the values are tremendous in the way that you get to share knowledge on different parts of the game. There's so much to study, especially when you study MTTs. You can study like PKO tournaments. There's like a lot of maths and solver work to do there. ICM is very important part of the process. I've been doing a lot of that over the past couple of years. Yeah, just having people who can share their work and their knowledge, and reciprocally you can do the same. I think it's very powerful. You're gonna gain a lot of insights in a shorter time frame. And also, it's also I think just more motivating to like work with people who have similar values and goals in poker, and you share the success. You're one's like guy who's like scoring big, and you're like even more motivated to have a big score as well, and it's very motivating in that way.
So, tell me what the future holds for you in terms of, I mean, as far as you want to share it, what is your vision for the future? Maybe what are your high, hard goals, and how do you intend to drive yourself towards them going forwards?
Right. So in terms of my vision, I think my kind of like ultimate goal is to be playing the Triton events, like a lot of these events on a regular basis. I think these are very exciting events. I only play a handful, maybe one or two. I mean, I used to play a bit more like high stakes live tournaments, but also realistic at some point that I realized that I kind of like fell behind some of the best players. I think at some point I was doing very well. I was up there, but some of the guys did more work than me, and I knew when to like select more which tournaments I should be playing, and move down in stakes, which is fine. But yeah, the goal is always to move up and be part of the elite. And how do you get there? Well, it's a lot of work, but it's obviously a lot about studying, but it's about refining the way you study, about being more efficient, and then getting the backing to also sometimes play some bigger buy-ins, take some shots.
For sure.
But yeah, there's no rush. I'm not like in a big rush to get there again, but relatively soon that's the goal.
And as you know, the theme of this podcast is really around the mindset aspect of poker.
Right.
Where are your new frontiers which you're pushing in terms of mindset? What kind of work are you looking to do to take yourself, if possible, to an even higher level in that regard?
Right. I would say more visualization work. I feel like visualization has been very powerful since I've begun implementing it on a very regular basis. So actually coupling the visualization part with like some actually technical aspects of the game, some like specific sports where sometimes you're struggling or you're not sure about what's the best decision or how you should approach a sport. I think that helped a lot, especially when you're playing online and you have to deal with sometimes multiple decisions at a time. I think it's been great, so I'm gonna keep working in that direction, doing more visualization, and also clarifying as many blind spots as possible. Because I think we all have, even the top players, they all have some blind spots. For some sports where they can perform better, they're making mistakes, small mistakes sometimes, probably most of the time small ones, but they're not aware of it. So there's always room for progression and bringing more clarity into your strategies.
I'm really glad you've touched on visualization. I mean, there's been a lot of work done on this, and I think some of the best recent work is from Dr. Emily Balcetis, who's a psychologist from New York. And a lot of the work is related to visualization in athletics, but it's been found to have a wider application. And this idea of really narrowing in on short-term goals, and this comes back again to the macro and the micro. The big vision is good. It's good to have that. It's important, as Stephen Kotler's said, but it is important to then go really micro. And for example, her work has highlighted the fact that even recreational marathon runners, if they focus on the shorts of the person in front of them in the marathon, they run faster than if they just have a broader vision of getting to the finish line. But this is something that is also really important in knowledge professionals, having that visualization of, okay, I find this spot tough in game. I'm going to see myself confronting this spot and overcoming it. And actually executing on the learning,
right. When you find yourself in that specific spot, then you find it easier to navigate your way through it.
Exactly.
It's clearer in your mind, what you should focus on.
Yeah,
and
sure.
Yeah, it's also easier to deal with emotions that may arise. So it's very powerful.
Okay, so EPT London's coming up. I presume as a resident of London, you're going to be there. And
Indeed, very much looking forward to it, playing on the home ground.
Okay, that's going to be great, and I may well see you there. So it's been great seeing you, Sylvain. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing all of your insights with us.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
So many thanks to Sylvain for sharing his time and insights with us. As I mentioned at the beginning, Sylvain is somebody who can be described as a true professional. And what's notable is how deep he goes to improve himself away from the tables, not just in his technical game, but in his routines and his mental game preparation. So thank you again to Sylvain, and thank you for listening to this podcast. And I look forward to joining you for the next episode.